Hello, everybody. I'm Katya Noyes. I am the core director of the Team Science and Collaboration Core for Buffalo CTSI. And we're doing this series of interviews with investigators who have productive and successful experience working in large interdisciplinary teams. So my guest today is Dr. Jennifer Reed, who recently submitted a large P60 proposal to the NIH. And I would like to learn more about her experience building the team, working with this team, and also bringing a team of experienced administrators to help them with submission. Dr. Reed, welcome, and tell us about your work and about your team.
Yeah, so I'm Jennifer Reed. I'm in the Department of Psychology, where I'm also the chair of that department. And the work that I do is largely focused on alcohol and addictive behavior. But my own work also studies the intersection of trauma and post-traumatic stress as it relates to alcohol and substance use more broadly. The project that we pulled together was a P60 Center grant, which is a multi-component grant. It's a 5-year grant, but it contains several small R01 level individual investigator grants. It also has a administrative component. There is a pilot studies component. Often there's an educational component. So it has multiple administrative and functional components that are intended to bring large groups of investigators together to serve a higher scientific purpose than just an individual project alone. But it also has individual science pieces. And I was in conversations at the time with some people in my department, including my co-PI, Craig Calder, Becky Asher, Larry Hawk was involved in some of the early conversations. And then we were thinking about, so what could we do in the area of addiction that would really, be new and move the field forward? And then we started we thought about a lot of different ideas, but one that came up had to do with AI. And the more we thought about that, the more we thought that made a lot of sense because, that's an area also where UB has so many strengths and SUNY's made large investments and state investments. So we focused on that idea. And that everything started to flow from there. And then, as soon as we had the idea, then we started reaching out to people, and I can talk more about that, but, people who are doing work in the space of AI. And the first and smartest thing we did was reach out to Chitra. And she also then helped to build everything.
So Chitra Rajan is a director of the Office for Research Advancement, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is that so it's not that you've been writing center grants all the time by yourself and decided to switch to this model. You never even conceived the idea of writing such a large grant until this moment. And then how did you realize that? At what point in the process did you realize that you will need an advanced grant management group? Because I'm sure your school and your department provide pre-award management normally.
They do, and we have amazing pre-award support in our department. But I think once we decided we were doing this, we knew we had this idea to write a center grant, but none of us on this team had done this before. And so we started reaching out to other people and other universities who had done center grants. And I have to say, I remember one call with a colleague who's at Missouri, and he was going through each of the sections, and he was saying he was like, that's very hard. That's really hard. And all my notes just say very hard, really hard. Oh, this is really extremely hard. And so the scene from Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. I think I felt like we're going to need to bring in some bigger guns here. And it was really, I wasn't sure if I thought I have known Chitra for a while, so I wanted to just reach out and say, like, we're thinking about this. But I think it really would have been too much to do, even with the amazing, amazing pre-award support that we have. It really would have been too much for just one person.
Yeah, so it looks like you had a great insight. And so in reality, so it's not just a team effort, it's two teams, sort of one of a team of investigators. Some of them worked together before, and another team of grant administrators, that's Dr. Rajan's team, who also worked together before, but they worked with different investigators. And so there's this very complex social dynamics going on. You're bringing two things together, two teams together, and there is a little bit of pressure. There is a deadline and lots of millions of dollars at stakes, right?
Yeah.
So tell us how that team dynamics form, forming, norming, performing, storming, gelling. What things that work really well, and maybe other aspect that now with your experience you would do differently?
I think what worked really well, and I'm just a big believer in, like, it's the people. And so, we mentioned, we had the small team of people who'd come together. And then we started reaching out, expanding a bit. Partly, we reached out to Kenny Joseph, because we knew that he was doing AI work. And then also part of his job is to help connect people with other people who are doing AI work. Becky Asher knew him a little bit. And so she said, well, maybe I can contact him. And that was extremely important, because he was very helpful in finding people who were doing work in AI that would be able to help us build some of these ideas. We also reached out to people in public health who we'd known for a while, and started talking to them. And the thing we were looking for are who's doing research science that would be a good fit for this. And amongst our group, we were able to identify a few people, but we also honestly were thinking, like, who's good at this thing, and who's done this kind of thing before. We reached out to Lorraine Collins. She's been doing pilot work on cannabis use. She knows how to write a proposal to do that. We reached out to Greg Hamish. He runs a T32, among other things. He's the chair of a department in public health. So we wanted people who had some content expertise, and then we also wanted people who, have good administrative ideas and thoughts structurally about how should things run and how can we pitch ideas. So I think we thought a lot about what are the skills that we need and who do we know who can do that. And then I guess I will say one thing. One of our earliest meetings, when we started having everybody on board, we said, look, we're pulling this together in a really short time frame. And these kinds of grants are incredibly hard to get funded. And so the overwhelming likelihood is that this is not going to get funded. And it's going to be a lot of work and we don't know what we're doing. And the thing that was so, I don't know, gratifying to me is we kind of laid it out and it's like, this is going to be really hard and there's a good chance that we're not going to be successful, but we think it's going to be exciting and fun. And we think at the end of it, we're going to come out with some really good collaborations and ideas. And I think that the people were on board for that was a good sign, that these are people who want to just kind of do something different and exciting and stretch themselves a bit and build some collaborations. And I think that aspect of every single person on the team was on board with that was really important.
That's a great insight. So it's not that people were volunteered to be on the team. They were not coerced. So the people who were on the team really wanted to be on the team, right? Yeah, and you probably, it sounds like, had a great intuition of whom to invite and how to invite them, sort of using a liaison or people they work with. Because for a lot of our junior faculty, they said, I want to have a bigger team, but I don't know how I'm going to reach to all those experts. And so there's a little bit of process, how you reach and you bring and you member and who you bring. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think actually starting out small, I mean, our initial phone calls were just with 4 people. And then thinking about, making that circle a little bit bigger and then making the circle a little bit bigger. I don't know that it would have worked as well if we had said, all right, let's pick 20 people. I think we built it. And as we sort of had more of a sense of what we were doing, then we added more people, and then we had more of a sense and we added more people. And I think that was a little bit easier. And I've been at UB for a long time. I know a number of people on campus. But I still think it would be daunting to just come up with as big a team just off the top of my head. And I don't think it would have worked as well.
Yeah, and so I think the other important component is that the team formation followed the evolution of your grant idea,
Mhm.
right? So it's really the idea of the grant and the aims and the structure that drove the team. Sometimes it's the opposite. A bunch of friends get together with beer and said, "We're such a
Yeah.
great group. What can we
Hmm.
do together?" So there are probably different strategies to this,
Yeah.
but in your case, it worked so spectacularly well because it was very strategic team building.
Yeah, very much so. And thinking about what are people good at, and who might do work well together. Um,
Oh, so that is a very interesting domain because again, in academia, and you read on team building teams, they'll talk about competencies, and we automatically assumes which competencies that you're a psychologist, I'm economist, somebody's anthropologist, but that's only one level of competencies. But there are also teamwork competencies. And so tell me more. How were you sort of optimizing? Because you clearly need research competencies, but as you said, you want to look at the right personalities, and bring people who are able to work on this team.
yeah, and I mean, fortunately, every team has its own personality. In our team, um, we really like we're not having to navigate anybody who's particularly challenging in any way or that. But I know in other experiences you have to think about like this person might be bringing a really strong perspective and they're bringing a lot of authority and seniority and experience, and that's great. But we also don't want that person to steamroll over everybody else so that this becomes their project. And so thinking about who might offset that? And again, we didn't do a whole lot of this in this particular team building. This was a pretty easy team. But I know in other situations when I've done team building, I think about um, sometimes the very strengths somebody's bringing are so important to the success of the project. But you may also need somebody to counter that those strengths in a way that like might smooth things out or provide a different perspective or so that's always the fun and the challenge, I think, of building a team.
Very interesting. So I want to ask you now about the other aspect of the team is working with administrators, because that's another barrier. And we talked about it, that researchers often said, I have no time to explain to somebody who is not a researcher what I need. It's easy for me to just do it myself. But based on what you shared with me, that the value that Dr. Rajan's team brought to this proposal was invaluable. So how did this dynamic work between the researchers and people who are not researchers, but useful and supportive?
I cannot say enough, and I will sing the praises of Chitra and the team at the VPRED office to anybody who will listen. I think the thing that they have is that they are working as a team, and they're very oriented toward hearing like what might we need, and they offered helpful. Oftentimes they would offer things that like I didn't even know we needed that. I mean, one of the big things is they said, you're probably going to want some really strong graphics. And most individual investigators, I know I typically do my own graphics if I'm writing a single grant. I'm making the arrows and the circles and I'm doing it myself. So that wouldn't even have occurred to me to ask for that. But they had somebody who was working, and we had meetings with him, and like literally like little sketches on pen and paper sketches that I was holding up to my screen and saying, this is the kind of thing we're doing and here's the idea. And he would be like trying to listen to that and he would get on board, and oftentimes it was iterative, both the figures themselves, but every aspect of working with that team, we might say, I think we need this, or they might say to us, we think you need this. And one of us would send a draft and the others would say, well, I don't know if that's quite it, or that's fantastic, leave it alone, let's go. But I think it really involved a lot of being willing to pitch an idea to one another, say, I think you might need this, I think you might benefit from this. And then iteratively trying to arrive at something that reflects what the scientist wants, but also, the people in the VPRAD office, they see a lot of grants, and they're bringing a perspective to it that goes well beyond your own idea of your science. And I think they were especially good at translating what we're doing and why it's important in a way that I don't think I would have been able to do on my own, frankly. I think investigators often are not called upon to convey their ideas in a bigger way to a general audience. And that was something that Chitra and her team just were outstanding at, and would just send me like what do you think about this? And then I would work with it. But they gave us a running start on that.
Yeah, and that is probably a unique aspect that as a researcher, we don't think about, because most of the time we preach to the choir, right? You talk to your colleagues
Mm-hmm.
who know and understand, and they read that paper and they saw that presentation, but the audience for reviewing larger grants may be much more heterogeneous. And so the emphasis on plain language and explaining becomes so much greater. So that is a very interesting aspect why external reader may be so helpful on those bigger proposals.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in many ways it's an advantage that maybe this person doesn't know all the details of your own of the science that you're planning on doing, because so too may not a reviewer have that kind of expertise, or somebody in the program office,
Mm-hmm.
that when they're making final decisions about what to fund, I think the presumption that everybody's going to have a very fine level of expertise on your topic area is a pretty shaky one when it comes to these things. So I think that was really helpful. Something I did want to say, if you don't mind, because I was reflecting on this,
Yeah.
and you were saying what made this successful. Um, I have never done improv in my life. I don't do improv, but I have read a little bit about improv, and I think a lot of it translates into collaborative science. And the big thing is that in improvisation, you're working with another person or a few other people, and you're trying to understand what are they trying to do. And like there's a rule of improv, which is like always be moving the action
Yes.
forward. And to see like, okay, this is the thing they're trying to do here. And your job is to be part of it and move it forward. Your job is not to show them how you knew better or your thing is funnier, or like, it's really about, can you join this and be part of it and make it better and move it forward? And it's hard. I think that is very much how I felt with this team. And that was, when we worked with Kenny Joseph and his group, it felt like everybody was coming to the project and saying, like, listening and hearing and saying, what are you trying to do? And then jumping in and trying to move it forward.
That is a very interesting analogy. It never occurred to me, but it's sort of willingness to join the team, right? And some kind of a commitment to success. So, Dr. Reed, you described a very successful and very productive team that I think makes everybody wanting to be part of that team. But I'm sure not everything every day was rosy, and there were challenges, which is a normal part of any teamwork. So is there any experience or lesson that you would like to share that was a useful learning experience, or something you didn't expect, but you want to take that home and maybe share with us?
I have had many experiences that I have learned a lot from and that have been really wonderful, but there were lessons to be learned. I think there were lessons to be learned in this. But it did, I think, come together really well because the people were pretty committed to it. I guess one thing that was really important was communicating and saying to people, like we had a few junior faculty who were part of this, including somebody, Allison Haney, who is in public health. She's in her second year of a pre-tenure position. Like something that, I worried about is it's one thing to do this kind of crazy, incredibly time-consuming, low likelihood of success activity when you're a tenured full professor. It's another when you're asking somebody who's junior who could be spending their time in some other way to get on board with this, kind kind of nutty agenda. So I think wanting to really be clear at the outset, this is what this is going to be, and it's going to be really intense for several weeks. But then also, checking in a lot and saying like, how are you feeling about this? Is there something I can do to help you? Is there some way that I can support you? I think just communicating with each individual in the team of like, what's going on for you? And how can we help how can we help you so that you can get on board with this project in a way that is, also constructive and good for you. I think that was one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest things that I think we all, especially those of us who are senior on the project, worried about.
That's a very interesting observation. So I, as you know, I teach teamwork and team science, and so this is one of the classic description between team leaders and hierarchical leaders, that team leaders empower and support their team members rather than barking directions. And so I think what you describe is a really unique characteristic and critical characteristics of a team leader to make sure that your team is doing well. Because really the success of a project depends not just on you, but on the entire team functioning in concert, right? And everybody delivering their part. So that is probably one of the unique qualities that investigators who are planning to work on teams should train in themselves, using those different models of, you can call it adaptive leadership, right? That you don't do what you're best at, you do and you help who needs the most help today. And you mentioned the junior faculty, but it could also be another senior faculty who has a lot on their plate and something else going on.
And I think I should also mention Kenny had a newborn, I think, when all this was going on, which is also, and so, every person on the team, but some more than others, had a lot on their plate also besides this project. And so just trying to think about like, what can you do with, I guess the one other thing I would say is I'm a big fan of structure. And so having here's the timeline, here's where we are in the timeline, here's what we've done, here's what's ahead of us. Just so that everybody has a sense of the bigger picture and then can anticipate to some extent, like, okay, we're going to have this really intensive period coming up. Can people do this? Who's in a position to be able to do this? And when, I think allows people a little bit more flexibility and I guess orients everybody to the team and the job at hand. Because otherwise you can get lost in your own piece of it and not be aware of the bigger picture.
Right. And so was that the part of your job, or was it part of RIA teams to give you that sort of checklist? This is what we have, this is what we don't have.
A little bit of both. So Craig Holder and I were the co-PIs. And we, at the outset, were sort of, laid out like, here are the moving parts, here's the deadline, here are the components. But then Chitra and her group had a lot of smaller, interim deadlines, and here are some other things to add to this. And so we had weekly meetings to check in. And at those weekly meetings, we would show this timeline, and we would kind of look at where we are and say, like, so are there missing pieces here? I know that we have this and this, but I'm not exactly sure how we're going to get from here to here. So I think having that timeline also allowed us to create the to-do lists that helped us move through the timeline.
Yeah. So it's not just a magic that everybody reads everybody's mind.
Right.
There are some actually best practices how to make it consistent, transparent, and collaborative.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this, Dr. Reed. And I know you got a site visit. So do you know any more?
We are now waiting for NIAAA. They have I guess there's sort of a higher level harmonizing scores meeting that will happen in August, and then we'll get an initial score. I think we won't hear about funding for another 6 months or so after that. So it's a
Okay.
long process.
Well, fingers crossed for you and best of luck to your team.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you.